Okay, I'm going to get a clock going here so that I'll be on time and all of that good stuff. And, okay, my name's Polly Pistol and I'm an alcoholic. By God's grace, in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't had a drink since April the 11th of 1977, and for that I am eternally grateful. Woo! I have a home group, and that's the West Connect group in Jacksonville, Florida. We meet on Monday night at 7 o'clock, and if you're ever in Jacksonville, Florida, give me a call and I'll take you to a meeting. I have a sponsor. My sponsor has a sponsor, and I sponsor. I have a sponsor, my sponsor has a sponsor, and I sponsor. That's a little routine that it is. And I am so delighted to be here. And Jimmy and Mary Beth, thank you for the privilege. It's an absolute honor and a privilege to be able to be here at the Jersey Shore Roundup. And it's an absolute privilege and an honor to get to be here with the people I'm with. A lot of stuff is going through my heart right now, and I'm going to give you a little bit of my story, because I don't know what it is, but here lately at the Woodstocks, about the last 4 I've done, maybe 5, I've done 6 and 7. I think God's trying to say, you need to do something about those character defects. And at any rate, I'm just so delighted to be here. And I have a whole posse of women over here that I've just had a fabulous time with. And only they know how intimidated I am by all the people who have preceded me. Because have they been fabulous or what? Woo! Fantastic. And I'm telling you, there's still so much to go. I mean, it's unbelievable. There's still so much to go. And I'm just so grateful to be here. But I was talking to Linda, and I don't know when this was, but what year it was. But Linda and Bob and Dave and I were talking in Banff, Ontario. And Bob did a talk that Sunday morning on steps 6 and 7. I'm sure it's been at least 15 or 16 years ago. That is required listening to women I sponsor. I love that talk. Absolutely gave me a beginning for steps 6 and 7. And I don't know why, I've never mentioned that before when I do 6 and 7, but for whatever reason, it just swept over me today, that I remember it was that talk, that absolutely, because my deal is that I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I can tell you right now, my program looks nothing like it did when I came in. And I think that is as it should be, that we grow in the program. We grow in understanding and effectiveness. That's what we're here to do. It absolutely looks nothing like it did. When I got sober in Texas, there are a lot of things that I still do today that they taught me to do. And one of them is that you go through the steps quickly. Just exactly what's been said by different speakers. You go through the steps quickly. That's what I was taught. I was told that Dr. Bob took 5,000 people through the steps, and he would do it in an afternoon. And as my sponsor Frank used to say, if it was good enough for Bob, it was good enough for him, that he took people through the steps quickly. I have always been a student of the Big Book. But I can tell you, I'm not a student like I am a student today. And it's just because people have come along that have talked about the Big Book differently. And for me, that change started with Don Pritz. that turn took place for me probably about 20 years ago, when I really got close and up personal and really listening and being with Don Pritz. And it's even gone a little differently now. I'm prone to a character defect called judgment. I don't know if anybody has that problem. And one of the things that I was hearing about for a few years and had started in Jacksonville was a primary purpose big book study. And I would just, we'd hear about the primary purpose big book study, and our home group is a group that we do, it's a literature meeting. We take something out of the big book, and a person talks for 10 minutes, and then that's our topic. And people were making some comments, as people will do in AA. I mean, nobody else, you know how we are in AA. We got to judge everybody. And they would call us a disgusting meeting because we were a discussion meeting. And so I kind of got my back up and this line by line big book, and I was like, well, what could that be? Line by line big book. And I want you to know that for the past year and a half, I am a member of the primary purpose group in Jacksonville, Florida. So that's what happens. If I judge it, and this is what I have learned, I believe we talk about it as a spiritual axiom. Whenever I'm disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with me. My AA sponsor, Dottie Harris, who has gone to the big meeting now, she took it a little bit further. She says, if I judge it, I get to do it. And I believe that. So today, I'm going to do the best I can to ask God to help me not judge his kids. There's absolutely, that is a character defect. Now, Sheldon brought us through steps 4 and 5 like I can't even believe. That was just to set me up for 6 and 7. Because what I need to do now is we're going to take these defects that are going to come out of what my mistakes are, and I'm going to kind of talk about how I do the steps with my sponsees and how I do it and how I did it. So I think I'll kind of give a little bit about myself. And I'm an alcoholic who came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and never even knew another alcoholic. My parents are not alcoholic. No one I knew in my family was alcoholic. I had been in the military for 22 years with my first husband, and nobody I know is in AA or even needs to be. And as far as I knew, there were no alcoholics there. So I didn't even know what an alcoholic was. I'd seen the movie Days of Wine and Roses and I'll Cry Tomorrow, but that didn't seem to apply to me. It just didn't seem like that's who I was. And I ended up in a detox center for the first time, and in that detox center, there were people who were divorced. Oh my God, I couldn't even believe that. There were people who were divorced. There were people who had been to jail. There were people who had been to prison. And so what did I do? The first thing I do is I say, people like me don't become alcoholic. Because I didn't know anything about alcoholism. All I knew is that what happened for me is that I was somebody who became somebody else when they took a drink of alcohol. Now, I never read the doctor's opinion, and when I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and I was handed the doctor's opinion, I knew what was wrong with me. And I didn't know that first 7 days in detox. But I would, after several relapses, I would understand what was wrong with me. And what happened is that into the doctor's opinion, it talks about, that I'm a person who takes a drink of alcohol. And I'm going to try to make sure that I talk things that are, that I say it so that I try to quote the book and I'm just not good at it, okay? So, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it's injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. To me, I would take a drink of alcohol, and what would happen is that I would know I had gotten to a place that I knew that I should not take this drink of alcohol. This drink of alcohol causes problems. And not only that, what would happen is I'd also take these little tablets that I had been given from the military. And what those little tablets would do, because I come from the days of barbiturates and tranquilizers. And what would happen is those would just pass me out more and more. Now, I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love Alcoholics Anonymous so much. I have so much fun in this fellowship, I can barely stand it. I have so much fun in this fellowship. But I can tell you, I did not drink and socialize. I was not a person who was out having drinks. I would do it, but I would do it very carefully because I was an Air Force officer's wife, and I knew very well that I should not drink a lot because it was absolutely not okay for me to be drunk and disorderly in public. I was told a long time ago that I had a responsibility of how I acted and behaved to my husband's career. My husband was a bomber pilot, and I just was told a long time ago before I took my first drink of alcohol that how I was to behave, and those the things I was supposed to do to help enhance his career. So what happened for me is I took a drink of alcohol when I was 18 years old, and something happened to me that day that didn't happen to anybody else. I went to an Officers' Wives Club luncheon, and something happened to me that day that didn't happen to anybody else. I took that drink of alcohol, and it went down. And all of a sudden, it went out to the ends of my fingers and my toes. I can still feel that warmth as it went down. And it was just as if it were yesterday. I can feel it. That feeling of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. That feeling came to me. All I knew was, I don't think I became a falling down alcoholic. I know I didn't right away. But all I knew was I had this feeling as a kid. I was only 18, but I'm kind of late drinking according to the rest of the people here. Well, maybe not you, Tom. You were a little late there too. But I always just was this uptight kid, an angry, rageful, always upset kid. That's who I was. And I'd take a drink of alcohol and I could just mellow out. It seemed like all that stuff that was going on just started to go away. And alcohol gave me that feeling of ease and comfort. Now, I would like to say that what happened for me is when I would take a drink of alcohol, as my alcoholism progressed, as I would take a drink of alcohol, I would become meaner and meaner and meaner. And my little thing went away. I would become meaner and meaner as I would drink alcohol. And there was only 2 people around my house that I had any interaction with, because my husband was a bomber pilot, and he was gone all the time. He was gone for years at a time. And those two people were my two sons. And what happened was, again, as it's described in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And what happens for me is that when I take a drink of alcohol, I become somebody else. I become mean, I become abusive. My children have been abused by me in many ways. I have abused them physically, emotionally, spiritually, and most of all, by blatant neglect. I know what it feels like to come to, Tom, and have beaten somebody up and don't even remember it, can't believe I did it. How could I do that? And I don't know about you, but the only thing I could do to even begin to handle the guilt, the shame, the remorse is take another drink that caused me to do it again. Because I could not stand myself. I couldn't stand who I was. I couldn't stand what I was doing to my kids. Now, I'd love to say that my disposition and my personality was all, I had some bad traits before I ever took a drink of alcohol. And one of them was anger and rage. I was a rageful child. My mother even says, God, I've never even said this in my talk either. My mother used to say I was a little girl when I was a baby, and I'd bang my head on the floor. I mean, good Lord, I was already hurting me before I even knew what I was doing. I'll show you, I'll hurt me. But I was rageful. My mother and father, I'm an only child, I'm a loved child, I'm an appreciated child, I'm a cared for child. But my parents didn't have money. I'm a latchkey kid before it was ever popular. And my mother, they would work hard. My mother worked. I was ashamed of my mother because she worked. I understood that, Sheldon. I was ashamed. When I was a little girl, mothers didn't work. And what happened is my mother worked, and I was ashamed of that. And so that I could have dancing lessons and gymnastic lessons, and my parents could give me all these things, she worked. She made my dancing costumes. She also made my clothes. And I was such an unappreciative child that I would stand in front of my mom saying, I don't want these clothes. I want store-bought clothes like everybody else has. So there was a restless, irritable, discontent person before I ever took a drink of alcohol. And that drink of alcohol on the onset would mellow me out. But what would happen is I would become rageful and angry. And I had those two little boys that I had to take care of. And what I was doing is screaming my lungs out at these little boys. I was screaming too. Screaming my lungs out, hitting them, saying things to my kids. I told James one time, if you were first, you'd have been last. Just anything I could to push my kids away from me is what I did. So that personality, a lot of that personality was already there. And I took a drink of alcohol, and what would happen is I was a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and I would be so mean to these kids. Mean. When I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, the facts of my life were that my dad was in Abilene, Texas, dying from colon cancer. My husband had been medically discharged from the Air Force, 100% medically discharged, and he was 80% bedridden. And we don't know, we haven't any proof, but it was pretty clear because they didn't do a lot about it that many years ago, 40 years ago. They didn't do that much about it. but we're pretty sure he was a victim of Agent Orange, and he picked it up in Vietnam. He was in Da Nang for a year. So what happened is, and I had 2 children who were totally messed up. And I get put in a detox center to detox from alcoholism. Well, I immediately needed something to feel better, and it wasn't going to be alcohol or drugs, so I ended up having an affair with one of the patients in the detox center. And we end up walking off into paradise for 58 days. And I'm brought back into that detox more dead than alive. And I sit there in that detox, and I can hear Clancy as he talks about how he feels when he's sober, what it feels like to be sober and not have a program and not have the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm in this detox center, and all I can think about is, I cannot live sober with what I've done to my kids. I can't live sober with how I have not been there for my dad. I cannot live sober how I have not been there for my husband. And the thing about it is, all I can say is, I did these horrible things, but make no mistake, I loved my sons. I loved my sons. I loved my mom. I loved my dad. I loved my husband. I loved these people. But I take a drink of alcohol, and that's what happens to me. That's how I react when I take a drink of alcohol. I become somebody else. What happened for me is I ended up being court committed to treatment at a treatment center in Dallas, Texas. And I was in that treatment center for 28 days. And when I got out of that treatment center, I asked the man who had been the director of that detox center if he would sponsor me. And he did. And we began to do the steps. I had done a 4th and 5th step in that detox center. And he told me that that made a fabulous novel, but it did nothing for inventory. And he had me do an inventory. We did the steps again. He had me do an inventory. And we went to steps 6 and 7. Now, I did not see the significance, I'll just be perfectly honest with you, the real significance of steps 6 and 7 until I heard Bob talking Banff. And that was probably 15 or 16 years ago. I mean, I had them. I had done it. I do character defects. He did them with me. I do them with the women I sponsor. What I do is exactly what he did with me. When I read my inventory across, and when I talked about my mistakes, again, we called it my part. But we called it my part. I never heard it differently till I heard Bob say that about show that little thing about tear the paper. And that was, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. So I've learned a lot in the last little bit. Things have changed a bit. But I really didn't see the significance of step 6, except that I wrote down the character defects because he helped me do it. He helped me write down the character defects in a 5th column, and we'd write down the character defects, and then we'd get on our knees and say step 7. Well, today I see step 6 very differently. And one of the things that has happened with that has been a lot about the big book studies that I've been doing of late, and really before I started the primary purpose. But some big book studies that I've done and some speakers that I've heard. So if you're here and you think, oh my God, I'm here and I'm listening to these speakers and I probably can't learn a thing. Well, let me tell you something. I'm 40 years sober, and every time I come to one of these things, I learn something. I learned something. It's just like every time I go through that big book, they put something else in it. And my thought process changes. It changes. As the years have gone by, it's changed. I must do something this one time. I should go back and listen to a tape that I did maybe 30 years ago. I mean, it wouldn't even sound like me today. It wouldn't even be the person that I am today, because my life has changed as I've learned more, and I've studied more, and we're doing different things in AA than I did when I came in. I had never even heard people doing the book like Don did it. It was just amazing, and that wasn't 20 years ago, maybe more. I don't know for sure. Time eludes me, but it has changed. So when I did 6 and 7, I thought I was done. I thought that was it. You know, there's your character defects. Oh, well, you got to ask God to remove them. Well, then I started hearing about write down your character defects. And then on the other side, if anger is what is a character defect, then I want to be without anger. The book tells me that we're people who cannot deal with anger, and I'm a person who cannot deal with anger. And I loved about finding out what's underneath the anger. And that's what I've grown to learn, find out what's going on underneath the anger. And I've learned that fear, I am driven by 100 forms of fear. Everything that happens to me is about fear. I have so much fear that I didn't even know that I had. I mean, I thought, oh, well, it must be fear of snakes, fear of this, fear of that. You ought to see me before I came up to this podium. I'm absolutely terrified. Why am I terrified? Because just maybe you won't like me. Maybe you won't think that I did a good talk. Maybe you won't, all of this stuff that goes through our heads, all about ego. There is no humility in that. God is in charge. God is all powerful. I have my girls pray with me. Linda and Marion prayed with me. Those are the things we do for each other so that God can be in charge. Because what happens is that I believe, because I fell in love with a guy named Sandy Beach and another man by the name of Chuck Chamberlain, and both of those men would talk about that our character defects are what separate us from God. It is my character defects that keeps me separated from God. Chuck and Sandy talked about conscious separation from God and man. So if I've got a problem with you, if I have a problem with anybody in my life, then I'm in trouble, because having that problem with man separates me from God. Because you see, God loves him as much as he loves me. And it becomes necessary for me to get busy in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and develop a conscious contact in God. I need that conscious contact to keep me from being separated from man. And these character defects do that. And most all of the character defects, or at least mine, and that's what the book tells me too, are based in fear. It's my fear of my fear of people, my fear of not having enough money, financial insecurity, my fear of not being loved. It's all those fears that I have that separate me from God. And what happens is I'm God's kid. I'm God's kid. And if I'm God's kid, I'm loved. All his kids are loved exactly the same way. When I ask God in that 7th step to humbly ask him to remove my defects. I'm asking him to take away the things that cause me all of the problems in my life. And what I've come to learn is that I learned in that talk many years ago how important steps 6 and 7 are. I thought I just didn't get it. I mean, it's 2 paragraphs in the big book. But one of the things that I've learned since I've been doing some studying of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous in the last 10 or so years, however long it's been, is that what happens is that most all of those character defects are laid out in step 3. Because it's going to be God who's going to remove these character defects. And it talks about our selfishness and self-centeredness. That's what drives me. The selfishness and self-centeredness. And I can remember my AA sponsor saying, Polly, it's not necessary that you think well of yourself. It's just you think only of yourself. Selfishness and self-centeredness. Because so when I'm not thinking well of myself, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about myself. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, self. My problem is self. And what I love is that start working with a newcomer, or even start working with somebody who's been sober a while but decides they don't want our way of life anymore, they don't want to do the steps anymore, and they think they've got it fine. So a sick mind is going to try to heal a sick mind. And just, you just stand there and you think, oh my God. This sick mind is going to try to heal this sick mind. Thank God for sponsorship. My sponsor died 2 years ago, May. And I had a sponsor in a week. God had already put her in my life, but I had a sponsor in a week. I need to be sponsored. I need to be sponsored. And I love what Bob says. I'm grateful I'm sponsorable. I'm glad that I can be sponsored today. I'm glad that I can take direction today. And I'm telling you, I don't always enjoy the direction because I'm going to tell you a little story about, I lost my little clock here. These phones are too much for me. I'm no good at them. Yeah, okay, I have 17 minutes. I got invited to go to the Boomerang Conference in Australia. Oh my God, I was so excited I could barely stand it. And I was excited to go to the conference, but the biggest excitement was I was going to get to be there with my son. And it was just like unbelievable. I was so excited. And James had called me on the phone and he said, Mom, he knows how I am. He said, I'm going to make a deal with you. I'll take you to the Great Barrier Reef, but you cannot let anybody else come with us. Because, see, I'm the kind of person, if somebody says, you want to go to the Great Barrier Reef? I'm like, oh, come on. It's like Gary was talking, I'm the all-inclusive kind of gal, let's come on, let's all go. And he says, I don't want to go with anybody but you. I just want to go with you. And so I was so excited about it. 2 weeks before I was getting ready to go to that conference, I had to have my husband taken to the emergency room by ambulance. My husband has been ill. And I just thought, there is no way I can go to Australia. There is no way I can do that. And so what I had done is I had called Australia, and I said, there's just no way that I can do this. And they were very kind, they understood. I just can't leave my husband. He's just, it's just, I'm just worried. I'm just too afraid to leave him. And after all this, I called them and everything, and I thought, well, maybe I need to call my sponsor about this decision. And I called my sponsor, and Rena listened to me tell her what I had done, and she just asked me, Polly, what are you afraid of? And I remember having this conversation with Mary Beth a few years ago. She said, what are you afraid of? And I said, I'm afraid something's going to happen to him, and I'm not going to be there. And if it does, I'll never get over it. Sound a little self-centered? Making it all about me? You know, what if something happened to him and I wasn't there and I'd never get over it? And Rena is very kind. The way she sponsors is very direct, but very kind. And she said, oh, no God in that. And then she said, what kind of provisions have you made for Dave? And I told her all the provisions that I had made. And she says, well, it sounds to me like you have absolutely taken amazing care of him. He is not going to be alone 1 minute. The only person who isn't going to be there is you. I suggest you call those people and tell them how sorry you are that you've caused them so much anxiety and that you will be in Australia. I wouldn't take anything in the world for that trip. But if I hadn't called my sponsor and gotten some sponsor direction, I would have done that just because of my fear. And one more time, self-reliance failed me. Self-reliance failed me. And I have to get help all week this weekend because I have nobody staying with Dave. I have people checking in on him, but I have nobody staying with him. And I have to realize that God either is or he isn't. He is either all things or he's not. And that Dave is going to be fine. And if he's not, then that's the way it was supposed to be. I am not going to keep him alive by myself. This has been a huge lesson for me, a huge lesson for me to let go. I had no idea. See, I think, I let go really easily. Well, let somebody get pretty sick, and it was pretty hard for me to let go. So I'm having a different lesson at this time in my life. I'm having a different experience with step 6. I'm beginning to see that just because I think I'm doing something good, maybe it's not necessarily good. But then what was beautiful, as I said something last night, Don was at dinner, and what happened is he asked me how Dave was. And I told him, I said, well, he's okay. I just get really nervous when I leave him. And he says, Polly, Dave loves Alcoholics Anonymous. He loves this program. I know that he loves this program. And he said, do you imagine how bad he feels when you won't go do things because he thinks you're staying there for him? See, all I was thinking about was myself and how it was affecting me. Again, I didn't pause and take a look at how it was affecting Dave. That character defect of self-reliance, feeling like I'm in charge of it all. And I'm not in charge of it all. That's just the whole thing. I'm not in charge. God's in charge. So what happens is step 7, I wanted to read something else. I dropped that I love also. And it says that it's talking about our character defects that we have are our survival skills. As long as I think that I was surviving by being a good caretaker, that I was being a good person. And what happened is sometimes caretaking hurts other people, especially if I take their dignity away by my caretaking. Where did I write that down? I wrote down another thing. At any rate, I'm going to use it as it's done in that most of our transitions, that when we have a transition, most of it is done through pain. I would love to be able to have a conversion and to be able to see things without having to go through the pain. But pain always, I hope I'm saying it correctly, always precedes the conversion. I seem to never be able to just learn something by what's going on. Just learn it and just be done with it. I seem to have to bring myself suffering in order to learn these character defects. Again, I want to go back into step 3. So our troubles, and I said this earlier, but I'm going to say it again, we think are basically of our own making. I said the step 10 thing, whenever we're disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with me. My troubles are of my own making. I set the ball in motion. I do it. I can go blame 100 different people for what's going on in my life, but because of my decisions based on self, I placed myself in a position to get hurt. And consequently, because of self and because of my selfish self-seeking, I hurt myself. My character defects. And out of those selfish, self-seeking character defects, I could get on the internet and print something off, and it'd show you about 400 character defects. Mine have been jealousy, judgment, judging other people, being jealousy, envy. I can remember thinking it selfishly. I have a grandson who was born deaf. And when he was 2 years old, we didn't know he was born deaf, but we knew something was wrong because he just didn't react like other kids. I don't think he was 2, but he was maybe a year and a half. We found out that Ryan was profoundly deaf. First of all, I said, how can this be happening? How can this be happening to me? It's my first grandchild. I couldn't have been more excited about my grandchild. How can this be happening to me? I sponsor women all over the place, and they're having babies. They're born perfect, and they don't even want them. And my baby is born deaf. And I truly believed that his life was over because he was born deaf. Now, Ryan was the one that was going to have to make this walk. And I was the one that, how could this be happening to me? Selfish, self-seeking, self-delusional, self-pity, my grandson. God has the most amazing sense of humor. And he works, the way he works his magic is so amazing. Ryan is a civil engineer, graduated in May from Rochester Institute of Technology, had a job before he even walked. He's handicapped in no way. He has made a walk against all odds. He's made a walk in life against all odds. I can remember Ryan going to high school, Evanston High School. 4,000 students in Evanston High School. And Ryan's the only deaf kid there. And he's walking around with an interpreter. And Ryan, I can remember sitting around, and I can do it today, like, I feel so different. Ryan was different, and he suited up and he showed up every day. It's amazing. God is absolutely amazing that the gifts he can show us and the opportunities that we get to watch his magic, the way we get to watch him perform his magic is absolutely amazing. How a mother who did the things I did for my sons, to my sons, not for them, to them, the things that I did to my sons, the abuse I brought upon my children, that it still affects them today, and they're 57 and 55 years old, and they still bear those scars. Oh, they're healed up, but the scars remain. They remain. That could say to his mom, I want to take you to the Great Barrier Reef, but I don't want you to take anybody else. Want to be just with me. My oldest son and I have had a harder road. Russ is not in the program, and it's been a harder road. And Russ has also got a little bit different personality, and I just really did not know how to deal with Russ. He learns differently. He's just walks to a different drummer, an amazing musician, but just walks to a different drummer. And what would happen is that I would call him up and I'd say, Russ, why don't you ever call me? Because I would do this, I'd play this little game. Well, I'm going to wait till he calls me. But he never would. And so I'd call him. And I said, why don't you ever call me? And he says, well, I just don't have anything to say. But see, it was all about me. I wanted him to call me. And what I've learned a lot about some of the things that go on with Russ is he really didn't have anything to say. He didn't have anything to say. And I wanted him to say something. I wanted him to act differently than he acted. I didn't want him to act differently for him. I wanted him to act differently so I was comfortable. My character defect, it's still about my selfishness and my self-centeredness. I believe that I have to try the very best I can to do differently. I have to be willing, if I say something to you that is unkind, if I am rude to somebody who's trying to be of service, to a salesperson, to a waitress, to anybody, it's going to be my responsibility to say I'm sorry immediately. I have to learn to do it. As Dave, my husband Dave says, if you keep making amends enough, you'll stop doing it. I have to take an action. God is not going to just come down and take a wand and make me just white as the driven snow. I think he has the power to do that. I just don't think he works like that. So what happens is I have to make an effort, as it says in step 7. I have to make an effort to act differently. To act differently, to take an action contrary to the way I feel, and act differently. And are all of these character defects, are they gone? Absolutely not. It's like a mole. You get one down and another one comes up, and you get another one down and 2 more come up. I've had a lot of problems with some anger with caretaking my husband. And he scares me. He wobbles. and he goes and does things, and and he puts his hands in his pockets, and everybody has said, keep your hands out of your pockets because, you know, he wobbles and you're going to face plant. And I'm telling him, please get your hands out of your pockets. Please do this. Please do that. And he gets so angry with me. And I get so angry with him. This is not, I got to stop. This is not the way I want to spend the last days. Because see, I'm at that. We're in the last days. I'm 77 and Dave's 81. We don't have 20 years. These are the winter years, and I don't want to spend my last days angry at my husband. So you know what I finally was able to do? If you face plant, we'll just take care of it then. And what happens is I just take these character defects and I humbly ask God to relieve them. Because I cannot do it any other way. I have tried to have the self-reliance. I have tried to take control of it, and it doesn't work. I can't fix it. All I can do is ask God to give me the courage to accept it just the way it is. My Creator, if you want to say this with me, I'm going to end with this. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. You know what? I may just have to battle some of these character defects. God may be using them. I don't know. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. God bless you all.